Hello and welcome to Box to Board. And tonight we're talking to Brian Laybourne from I don't know the name of your what's the name of your company? Because I know what you're making, which is Sapience, which is I'm
I haven't
quite
really.
excited.
I think on drive through it's Laybourne Publishing, but I haven't really bothered coming up with a publishing. It's my first book, so
So it's Laybourne Publishing, we'll call you. So
that'll do.
and it's about Sapiens, so which is on Kickstarter at the minute and is actually just caught my eye for a number of reasons. I love the fact that it's a lot. I love the sort of the science fiction pedigree, I suppose, that it's got, the sense of depth
Mhm.
to it, and it's an area of science fiction that hasn't really got an awful lot of RPG stuff, but it's actually got a real wealth of potential to it. And also I really like the mechanics, and I chatted to you earlier on, and and it is one of the things that kind of drew me to it. I see this as a very strong bridge game. Personally, I think it will work really well. I think if you're in a miniature war game and you've been looking at RPGs and you like sci-fi, my gut is this is one you're going to enjoy. So, what inspired you? Um, I know this is a passion project. So, why are you passionate about it? What was it that? What is it that's there?
So there's a few different inspirations that sort of came together to make Sapiens. I talk about a little bit in the introduction of the book. Actually, there's a little bit in the intro where I talk about where the book came from, and there's sort of four axes that we talk about for the game. One of the larger ones initially was I have a love of sci-fi. I've been a sci-fi fan all my life. A lot of role playing is fantasy based. It all came from originally Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and they played tabletop Napoleonic games and fantasy games, and so a lot of role playing still sort of wears that pedigree. And I think there are a lot of science fiction games out there, but not nearly enough, I think.
Yeah.
So initially that was just something that sort of spoke to me. I love sci-fi. I think you can't talk about sci-fi for very long without talking about Star Wars and Star Trek, which are kind of the two not granddaddies, but they're the two,
Yeah.
big players in the field, if you like. And they have a very different slant on the future. Star Trek's this heading towards a utopia where everybody's taken care of and we have a society that works. And that's conceptually I like that. I think that's a
Mm.
fantastic view of the future. I don't think it's a very realistic view of the future with the sort of painfully capitalist society that we live in. And I think Star Wars, with its more gritty kind of lived in kind of harder world where everybody's still just trying to make a living and survive. And I think that's probably a more realistic kind of view of the future. And I think my game probably owes a bit to the feel of Star Trek.
Mm.
Planet of the Apes is something that I've been a massive fan of since I was a kid, and there's definitely an influence there.
Yeah.
And this is, but without going into the themes yet. And then sort of the third one is I've always liked the concept, and it's done a fair bit in science fiction. Doesn't make it into fantasy very much, of the kind of a group of misfits coming together. So Gene Roddenberry called it a wagon train to the stars, right? So it's got that
Mm.
kind of excuse me, that kind of feel of, if you think about Han and Chewie on the Millennium Falcon, right, or the crew of the Serenity, you've got this group of people where their ship is their home, and they're just trying to make it in a universe that actually really doesn't care about them, and they become family to each other, even though there's going to be good and bad relationships and so forth. So you sort of munge all those together as conceptually the root of Sapiens.
Mm.
But I'm also trying to tell, not quite tell a story. I'm trying to, I think the best science fiction, the best stories, but science fiction does it a lot. It holds up a mirror, right? And as we experience or consume that kind of media, whether it be a movie or a book or a game, it lets us see aspects of our own society and maybe have a think about them, but reflected in the fact that we're doing it through allegory. We can, George Lucas said that Star Wars was really about the Vietnam War and America's involvement in the Vietnam War, right? Godzilla was about atomic power. These things are fairly obvious. Planet of the Apes was about how science and religion are often used to prop up inequality, which is coming closer to my theme. And, interestingly, Terminator 2 wasn't really about rampant AI. James Cameron said Terminator 2 was about the fact that cops view all non-cops as less than them and dehumanize them, which is why the villain in Terminator 2 was a cop, right? So we're telling these stories, but we're using them as a way of investigating the world, or at least becoming aware of the world. And so that's kind of my idea with Sapience. Humans have uplifted these other species. We've got gorillas and orangutans and octopuses to intelligence, but even though they're now sapient and they're just as intelligent or whatever as us, they don't have the same rights as us mostly in this system or in this setting. And so it's kind of the themes around discrimination and privilege I'm trying to bring in, just to make people think about the fact that that's pretty rampant in our society today, and it's maybe something to and if it it's a game and people can play the game and they can ignore those themes and hopefully have a fun time with the game. And some other people might play it and if it makes them think a little bit. I was playing an orangutan and I didn't like the way that the world was treating me. It might make them think a little bit, I guess, is the idea. I'm not trying to change the world. I'm just maybe trying to make people a little bit aware of the world in some ways. So that's kind of, I guess that's a really long answer, but those are all the aspects of the game that sort of came together to, as a whole, make Sapience what it is.
I think that's it's interesting because it's got good sci-fi has got a heart. It's got this sort of sense of a heart to it, and it has got it always is a moral code, and the moral codes are subtly different. So, like, I'm a big fan of The Expanse, and The Expanse has got a very strong moral sort of underlying theme of prejudice and difference and how you deal with difference. But I think that's a good thing. I think it's something that games don't always do. They don't always sort of wear their heart on the sleeve and say, look, this is one of the big themes that we've got. This is what we're about. And actually, it's something that is there, and this just might get you thinking. And actually, it's really interesting because I found whenever I looked at some of the background, it makes sense in its own terms, and it kind of is consistent. So you actually can see how in this universe, this is quite a sensible set of discussions to be having and making and working with, and you get to play it.
Yeah, well, I hope so. Yeah, there's a large sector of our modern society that I think if we came out with, if we managed to uplift apes to sapience, I think there's a large sector who would feel, as I try to reflect in the book, oh, look, they wouldn't be smart if it wasn't for us, right? So clearly, and we're intelligent. We did it ourselves. We didn't have to be bootstrapped, right? So clearly, we're better than them, right? And we know that that's how people think anyway. And I think it would be even worse if, excuse me, if you were an intelligent ape than a slightly different looking human, which is how it works at the moment. So it's an unfortunate part of human psychology, and I guess it's one that I wanted to explore a little bit, but in a safe way. They're not heavy themes in the book. I don't want to turn anybody off. I don't want to trigger anybody. The idea is just to start that conversation, if you like, mentally.
Yeah, it doesn't feel preachy. I mean, it's not a preachy history, but if you're doing uplift, it's kind of the natural theme. You know, it's kind of, it's a natural, it's going to come into that. So it's kind of like walking with your eyes wide open. This is going to be there, and this is the heart of it. Is how do these issues work out in this universe?
Yeah.
And actually, whenever you kind of, I don't know, whenever you get a bit more tolerant about apes, you suddenly find yourself going, yeah, maybe we need to be tolerant of people too.
Hope so.
A bit of luck, who knows? But I do love the fact, by the way, that you can be an octopus. Just that appeals to me a great deal.
Octopuses are awesome, man. They are the most interesting life form on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. I highly recommend people learn a bit about octopuses if they're at all interested. There's a documentary called My Octopus Teacher that just won an Oscar. Really watch it. Oh man, they've got 9 brains. We're not really sure how they're as intelligent as they are. They can squeeze through, you know, a massive octopus can squeeze through a gap as long as its beak can fit through, because it's the only hard part of it, and everything else just squishes down. They are perfect chameleons. I mean, they can instantly change their color to look very, very convincingly like a rock or whatever. They're the most interesting creatures. I love octopuses.
And in this game, you get to be one, which is superb. The rules. Let's talk about the rules. Can you explain how they work? So, because they're kind of one of those things. I think they're beautifully elegant. I think they're an elegant set of rules. They're not overly complicated. We talked earlier on about before the video about narrative gaming, and I'd never heard these phrases because I'm not that intellectual with games, but narrativist and simulationist, and it was and actually I like the fact that you're coming from a sort of probably a more narrative approach where the story is what matters and serve the story. And these games feel like that, or these rules feel like that. But can you go through them, because it was a big selling point for me whenever I looked at the project?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I like crunchy systems too, and I'll often throw myself into a role playing game that's got a lot of really interesting and cool rules to look at. But my love is games that are, so on the GNS scale, for any of your viewers who are aware of it, that there's actually 3 elements to the GNS scale, but I sort of mostly consider that there's a gradient between a heavily simulationist game that tries to simulate a world and give you lots of rules that'll cover everything that you might want to do in the world, and then you throw characters into it and see what happens, and that's awesome. I'll play that a lot. And on the other end of that scale for me is a heavily narrative game where the rules are less heavy, and the idea is that it's all about the story, right? And the rules are there to promote the story, as opposed to the story emerging from role play, if you like, at the other end of the scale. So I like a system, and I tried to design a system here where there are rules. We have rules for games, but the rules can jump out of the way and not be too heavy, and they promote that narrative kind of feel, so that the story keeps going. Because I think a role-playing game, for me, the whole point is the GM and the players are telling a shared story, right? So it's not a heavy system, but I hope it's an interesting system. In a nutshell, it's a dipole system, but it's a dipole system where you have 3 main attributes, and they're presence, security, and vigor. But think of them as being your mind and your body. Your mind and your body, and your social is kind of the third one, a social aspect. And you build a dipole based on dice of 3 different colors, so 1 color for each of those 3 attributes. So you'll have about 10 to 12 dice in your pool, depending on who you are, and they go into a bag. And when you're going to do a die check, you pull the number of dice out of the bag according to your skill, but you don't look at them as you pull them out, so that the colors will be random. So you'll get a small handful of dice, and you won't know what the colors are going to be, and then you roll them. And so you're getting 2 factors. There's 2 random factors that are coming out at the same time. You've got how many dice did I roll over that are 4 or higher, or they're all D6s. And so that's called your effort. And that's like any dipole system, the number of successes is used to determine how successful you are, right? Compared to a difficulty number, or to the other guy's successes if you're competing against them. But there's a second factor, which is the focus, which is the number of dice that you pulled out that match the attribute of what you're trying to do. So if I'm trying to do a physical skill, my physical attribute, how many red dice did I get? In the example, they're red. It doesn't really matter what colors you choose. And your focus allows you to then modify your usage of the skill, essentially by adding adverbs, right? A skill's a verb. It's a doing word, right? Apply an adverb. So I could use my focus to do the skill more quickly, or more quietly, or more violently, or right. And there's a lot of examples in the book of the sort of, but players and GMs are encouraged to come up with any adverbs that they can think of that would apply to the situation, and there's guidelines in there on how this might be used. So it allows, like, immediately, I hope, and certainly in feedback from the playtesters, it's I'm not just picking a skill, I'm picking a skill and how I perform that skill, which aids the narrative feel of the game. And that's the core of the rule system right there. I mean, there's some nuance in a few things, but I try to avoid having too many massive modifiers, and here's +2 to this and here's -4 from that. And you can get in a lot of games. I love D&D, don't get me wrong, but certainly, and especially in the early editions than the current one, in D&D it would be, so I have to add 3 because of that, and then I take away 2 because of that, and then subtract the number you first thought of. It's there's a lot of working out stuff at the table, and this is a fairly simple system. And I like to think it's elegant. So wounds in my system are in the form of black dice, and you put well, again, could be any color. They're black because I happen to have lots of black dice. You put the negative dice into the bag, and so when you're going to do a check, you pull out your handful of dice. Well, any black ones, because of wounds, they don't count. You can't use those. So the more injured you get, immediately the harder it gets to succeed at things. And that's the core of the system. That's how it works, and I've had really good feedback about how it works in play.
I like the black dice because it kind of feels it gives you that sense of, I still might be lucky,
Yeah,
I still might be able to pull this off. It's worth a shot.
That's right.
Which is always good. So it keeps you. Yeah, I like that. Kickstarter it seems to have been doing really well, actually.
I've been quite lucky. I didn't. It's my first Kickstarter, and I had no idea really how well it was going to go, or if anybody would be interested. I think a lot of Kickstarters fail and never go anywhere, and you just don't know, right? I was funded in 12 hours from initiating the Kickstarter, which I'm obviously really grateful and happy about. I've got some stretch goals in there. My stretch goals are all, I don't like Kickstarters that have heavy scope creep, right? Because I've backed things that you then wait for years because they've promised so much on their stretch goals that they can't possibly fulfill it without there being this massive delay.
Yeah.
Right. I think I backed one in 2013. I'm still waiting on. Well, I've given up now, but so all of my stretch goals are ones that I can do without actually impacting the book and the release of the book. And actually, the book's almost finished at this point. So yeah, I think at the moment the Kickstarter's at about 150%. We've reached the first stretch goal. There's a few more stretch goals. I'd love to see them get fulfilled. It'll just be more stuff, but not more book for the backers. Yeah,
it looks really good. I mean, we talked a little bit about the whole business of printing and just how to, because I know it's not a sort of, whenever you kickstart, it's different the way you're going to get a book. Can you go through that? Because I thought this was really interesting.
So as a small publisher, and I use the word publisher with a little bit of tongue in cheek because it's my first book that's mine. It's not really a possibility for me to order 1,000 copies or 10,000 copies of the book, have them all shipped to New Zealand so I can warehouse them, and then ship them all back out to backers. I mean, the costs there are absolutely insane. up until a few years ago, print on demand was something that people didn't use. It was a poor quality, generally poor quality result, but it's gotten to the point now where print on demand is pretty much the same quality that you get from the larger print runs, because they use the same printers. And so the way that I've structured the Kickstarter is you back it. It's a very low cost of entry, if you like. It's 20 New Zealand dollars, which is about 13 US, is all I'm asking people for. And that gets you the PDF. And it gives you the right to have the print copy of the book, but what will happen is after the Kickstarter, when you get your PDF, you'll also get instructions for a web page that you log into. You log onto this web page and you order the print copy from them, and you only pay a very small amount, and you're basically paying the direct printing cost of the book, which is be about $11 US. So if all you want's the PDF, you've already got it. That's your 13 US for the Kickstarter. If you want the print copy of the book, you pay about another 11 later, still making your total cost only $25 US. So it's still quite reasonable. And then they will then ship you a copy of the book. And I don't have to stress about that. And I don't have to think about importing into New Zealand and exporting again and paying customs and duty and all the other kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's good for me, but it's also good for the backers, because they'll get their book cheaper and shipped directly to them from closer to them, probably in most cases. I think they might do printing in the US and the UK. So, and they'll ship from there.
And it takes out that massive potential delay, because it's often that's right, where everyone's moving around, and it's just like that can be where holdups happen. So I thought, looking at it, I just think that's such a smart way to go, and I can see more people going that way, especially if it's something that is a smaller publisher. It makes sense. It's a fascinating project. I looked at, I'm looking at it and just thinking, it's one of those games that I think has got a lot of potential. The system's got a lot of potential, and I think, don't be surprised if you see a system creep up again. If you're watching this, I think a system will. I think it's a good system that will work really well, and I think a lot of people will like it because it is quick enough that you'll be able, as a GM, you'll be able to think on your feet, and that's a really helpful thing. So you don't break the spell of the moment. So you're not sort of in that, this is a really tense moment, let me consult the book for 5 minutes.
That's right. Yeah,
which is great. So it's for me personally, it hits a lot of my buttons. It's got good sci-fi, interesting world, interesting premise, bit of a heart to it, lovely system. It looks good. So I'm definitely bagging it. Let's put it like that. So
thanks, man.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
You better. I'm just being selfish. It's good. It's good. It looks like a really good game. So not a thank you. But yeah. So have a look, guys. If you're watching, have a look at it. It's Sapience, and it's worth a look. Check it out. See what you think, and give it a go. Thanks for your time, awesome, Brian. And
thank you for your time. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Bye.
Cheers.